Hey guys, it's Corey again over at Cyber Strategies AI. Today we're taking a look at the agent system again, and I've done a few changes, made a few changes to it. Specifically, the part where you call leads via the API. The other section is the agent round robin manager, and it has not changed. That's been a solid modular piece, so I think pretty well compartmentalized, encapsulated, and works quite well. It has the little ring counter in here, and then basically assignment of the variables as needed, and then the communication back to make it a de facto subroutine with these tags. So that is the same. It's still in play right here. It switches right there. One of the things I made a video yesterday or the day before on breaking this. I had this stack of checks here against stopping air calls, removing from the call flow, not interested, etc. I had to break these into individual lines because it was concatenating them together and using them as a set, meaning if you had that combination if it didn't include that exact combination in your set of tags, then it would, that's what it evaluated as true. So I need it to be individually tagged, does not include stop air calls, does not include remove from airflow, etc., individually. So I said, yep, it cannot include this one, and it cannot include that one, and it cannot include that one, it cannot include do not call. So that was a change that I have done there. I also installed, shall we call it, a debug route. So this is an evaluation that is evaluating against that system variable that I set up called, you can see it there, agent system air calling mode. And I can set it to leads API, or I can set it to calls API, or now I can also set it to debug test. And debug test allows me to skip all of these limitations on the calling time for agents. So I was doing this to test, and it would jump down here. It still respects the requirement of 500 per minute, which we kind of put on there. I talked to Air, and they felt like that was probably a pretty good rate to keep from getting timeouts and so forth. So I did put that. I'm batching those at 500 a minute, and it helps a little bit. It also helps with my intermediary, the transformer that I have in the middle at webhook.site, and that is limited to 1,000 a minute anyway. So this gives me some buffer there in the way that it chunks up minutes, etc., to make sure that I don't violate that and have it reject leads. So we get it at 500 a minute, and every time at that point we reevaluate again which calling mode we're in. So whether we're going to use the leads API or the calls API or debug. So if I do debug, if I select debug, I get to switch which one of these I point to. I can point debug to either one of these things, which is kind of a cool little path. So debug skips all the way down to here, and then it jumps into this route, and I can either point it here or point it there. So it gives me some flexibility for sure. Or I could just point it to, it just takes it out here, whatever I want to do. It's a debug route through this. And normally we're going to be running in leads or calls API mode, not in debug test, but that's one of the things that is the kind of the innovation for today is the leads and calls API are both treated the same in this, which reduced the amount of copying of these of the code structure, this flowchart structure, etc. I know it looks a little messy because it's like a freeway interchange on here now, but what it does do is quite cool because it treats the lead exactly the same, whether you're doing calls API or the leads API, either one of them. They still wait until the window that you've specified for that agent. You can specify all the same window if you wanted to, or make them different. Whatever it is, you do have the control. You're going to change agents, which will change the time of day that it calls and the script that it has. And it changes of course, the leads list if you're using leads API, or it changes just the agent prompt if you are using the calls API. Anyhow, they're treated the same. They're treated exactly the same. Calls API or leads API, all the way down through here, even the batching at 500 a minute, it's all treated the same. We still determine after the delay, because we could delay to the next day. We want to make sure we haven't found some reason and tagged that particular lead to be removed. So we double check that here to make sure it hasn't been tagged as do not call, hasn't been whatever. If you did that through the night, you don't want to accidentally call them in the morning if you figured out that you should have tagged them or whatever it is. So it does another check here, which will pull it right out of the calling loop again. So we jump down here and we batch at 500 a minute. Then we determine here whether or not which API we're using, whether we're using Leads API or Calls API. If we're using the Leads API, that's just the same as it was, except for we're now calling that webhook.site, which is we're using the free, I'll call it included webhook with Go High Level. This is included webhook, and then this one, they're the same. They're both in the included webhook versus how we were having to call, which is with the custom webhook. And I just parked this big train of calls if I wanted to call them multiple times during the day and not have a more complex call sequence. I could use this, and I would replace these all with the standard webhook. But I just parked this over here. I just in the null. I know it's probably not the greatest practice, but there's no real place. You can't just park code off to the side and leave it sitting there like you can write in regular code. You've got to attach it somehow to the actual running structure of your program. So anyhow, I just put it over here. I did replace this. This is example with what I need to send to webhook.site and to make this work, and it ultimately passes it on to Air, but I did replace the first one. So back here, we are looking at what does it actually do with a call when, at this point, it's all the same, all the way down to this point where I'm now going to do Leads API, and we're going to go manage it with Air directly, or we're going to manage it ourselves. So Air, when you put a lead on a lead list in Air, it will call that lead. I believe it's between like 9 a.m. and 8 p.m., 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and it will call them whenever it gets scheduled, when it finally runs, when it runs that particular lead, and then it will not call. It has a minimum delay of 3 hours. It'll be at least 3 hours before it calls again. It might be longer. It will not be less than 3 hours. So it sets a minimum delay, and it checks to make sure it's inside the calling window in 3 hours. So delays 3 hours at least, and then checks it, makes sure it's inside the calling window. If it is, it'll schedule it for a call, and it'll make another call. If not, it puts it back on the queue and waits till the next day. So that's all automated over here. With Air, the only thing, I'll get to that in a minute. We'll talk about budget. So when we do the Calls API, we have to manage it. We are just hitting a prompt. We're hitting an agent prompt, and we're going to tell it to call this person. So everything's encapsulated inside this contact that comes through. The contact has its information, phone information, name, etc. Plus, we've attached in it, which agent to use, which, agent 1 through 5. So that's going to be inside the lead. So the lead's going to, it has a unified call, but it can go to any agent and, call it whenever you want to. In fact, you can call outside of the expected time. So for right now, for this client, I have built this into a function that does the same thing as Air, with a couple of differences. The best I can do with the way it works. So it's going to call at this point. It's going to call at that time that it's been released. Once it gets released at a particular time of day, it ends up. All of these just come down here. They look messy because they're these go-tos, but they come down here. We make sure that the call is okay to make. We batch them in 500s, and then we drop down through here. And let's say we've set calls API as our choice. So we've got someday leads API, we don't want to use it, or leads API campaigns are backed up. That happens occasionally. Campaigns are backed up, but these calls will go out right away. They get immediately executed. So we don't get stuck in traffic here as much if we use this calls API. So we're going to drop through here. We're going to actually execute the call at this point. And then we're going to sit here and wait for 3 hours. So that's the same as the 3-hour delay that you get with Air. And then we're going to check the calling window. And we're saying between 9A and 8P. And it is inside the calling window. And then outside the calling window is, everything outside of that is outside of the calling window. So if it's between 9 and 8, we're going to call again, which means we'll just stick it back up here. We're just going to go right back up here, that route right there. And we're going to make sure we can still call after the delay. If it's still good, we're going to batch it at 500, and we're going to come right back to this point if we have still selected calls API. Very, very straightforward and simple. It's just wait for 3 hours, check the calling window, and put it right back through our exact same process that we had before. No difference, no complications. It is the same code rerunning, which makes it very maintainable, makes it very consistent. You won't have, you're not, oh, I forgot to edit this piece or that piece or the other piece. We're just routing it right back to the exact same path it came into here from. So if we're outside of the calling window, very simple solution there too. We just go back onto the queue. So we still are scheduled to run. We're still scheduled to call. So we're just going to put it right back onto this, stack, which based on the agent that it's set to, because we're not going to rotate agents. If we didn't get a pickup, we're not going to change agents. We're just going to continue to call with that agent until we get a pickup, and then we'll call again. We'll rotate agents and call another time. So we're going to come down here. It's still going to be set to the exact same agent was before. So it'll drop into one of these, and it'll sit here and queue until its call window again occurs. And then when its call window occurs, drops down here, calls them again, does the same thing, exact same thing. Or you've decided you're going to use the leads API now, and you switch back to that. Now, if you do, let's say we're sitting here, we're queued up on leads API, and we want to switch over to calls API. Yes, we can flip this switch right here and change that mode from leads to calls, which is really, really cool because it gives you a way out of being stuck. But you're going to need to turn off your campaigns over there in Air. You're going to need to go turn them off because you don't want to have this suddenly start, the leads API and the campaign start calling while you're calling here. You're gonna make double calls. So you want to turn off your campaigns over in Air, make sure those are all off. And then I would come back to all my leads that I have in that workflow and all that stuff. I mean, this is, it's not going to be squeaky clean, but I would remove the, call with Air on all of them. So I'd go back into the attributes on the contact and do a bulk update and remove the call with Air on all of those and then reapply it. So all the leads get a fresh start and they're in a new process now. They're in a brand new process. I would also remove it, just in case they were in this flow already, I would remove them from that. One downside that I can see there are a couple of things. If you do all of that, number one, you will come back. When you come back through here, you will switch agents. It'll switch agents to another agent. So you'll automatically advance one agent from what you were before. Not the end of the world, but it's just something to note, right? If you were calling with agent 2 using the leads API, and today for some reason your calls aren't going out and you want calls to go out, turn off your campaign over there. Clear the call with Air on probably just about everything. I guess you could have some sitting in waiting over in the outcome section. But that one, even if they are sitting there waiting in the outcome section, they're not tagged with call with Air, I don't believe. I'll have to make sure on that. They might be. It seems like we tag them, and then at the end of that, I'll have to look at that. But anyway, I would probably, let's just suffice it to say there's going to be some cleanup on these tags that you're going to have to do to make sure that you are not double calling. You want to turn off the campaigns, probably clear these tags, and then reapply them, and let all of those leads filter into this system in the way that they should. And at that point, they'll start calling based on this criteria right here. So the only delay you might have, I mean, it might take like a day to switch this thing over, is kind of what I'm thinking. But you'll be safe and be back in business calling like this, and you won't be subject to the backup, or you just want to change the way you do this. So let's say you no longer want, I mean, that's really a big thing, is you don't want to call, you don't want to wait for 3 hours and call again, toward the end of the day or whatever, and maybe you skip that. I can imagine, let's say you picked this one, you're 6 p.m. to 7:30, so you come in here, you call, well, you're gonna be at 8 o'clock, you're gonna be at 9 o'clock before it comes out of this and jumps back onto this queue. So you're going to get one call a day if you're calling late in the day with this system, the way it works. But if you called here 9, you could get 2 or 3 calls in throughout the day. This one, probably just one call, depends on when it hits. So anyhow, you can kind of see that you're going to be limited. Let's say you wanted to call again in an hour or whatever you wanted to do. That would be an option here that you would be able to control it better by using the calls API. You could build this sequence out longer. You could eliminate these kinds of things, whatever it is. What this is mimicking right now is as close as we can come to using, to behaving like a campaign, but using the calls API. So we can get calls out right now if we need to, and we don't have to worry about backups. That's just one. It's just a way to mitigate it and gives us another option. So the key takeaway is this is acting very much like a campaign. The way that this works, waits 3 hours, checks the calling window, and it either pushes it back to the next day, goes on the queue, or it calls again right now, bunches in 5, double checks, make sure we're good to go, bunches in 500 at a time, keep us safe, and keep us safe from a couple of places. If we have a do not call determination that we determine somewhere afterward that was figured out afterward, then we want to remove it from this flow. So we're being safe there. We're not just calling, and then we also batch it at 500 a minute, which will keep us from theoretically getting rejections at certain times a day or whatever on just trying to get through webhook.site too. So